Hi, everybody. Welcome back to In Pursuit of Our Roots. We're back. We've been gone for literally like 3 weeks. So we apologize, but like college has started and like we all had to get like our stuff together. But we're back better than ever. Um, since it is literally August the 30th, and of course we know 2 days ago that like literally legendary, iconic Chadwick Boseman passed away. So we do just want to like put our condolences out there to his friends and family who are really feeling it right now, and also to the Black community, our family. This really hurts. We all looked up to him as like our Black Panther and how he just embodied that role, but also how he embodied that off the screen as well, and how he played a lot of other characters like Thurgood Marshall in like the Five Bloods. Like
Yes,
he did it all while battling colon cancer. So we just really want to just appreciate him for that, and just thank him for like everything that he's done for like this community, and like the doors that he has opened as well with the position that he was in for the African American community. So to begin this podcast, we're going to be talking about the African American Revolution. So it's chapter 3, part 2. And we're just going to like dive right on in. Me and Jackson are. So beginning of the book talks about the American Revolution took place during the Enlightenment era, a time when thinkers throughout the Americans and Western Europe question like traditional institution, customs, and morals. It goes on to talk about James Otis Jr. maintain the colonists are by law of nature freeborn, as indeed all men are white or black. Many opposed this, but Americans did oppose that. They did no longer want to be a part of the American slave trade or the Atlantic slave trade. But of course, the American Revolution leaders avoided this direct subject about slavery because they thought it would divide the colonists more than unite it. But of course, you know, our brothers and sisters during this time, they just thought about freedom for who wouldn't at this time since the opportunity was given. So it talks about the road to independence, so taxation without representation. African Americans were largely unaffected by British taxes because Blacks were either enslaved or impoverished, and therefore they had little access to the goods that were taxed. So it also goes on to talk about the vile, ignominious slavery. So kind of talking about the colonists, how white colonists rhetoric gave slaves a powerful new political language, for which me reading this, when they were talking about like vile slavery, I don't know about you, Jackson, when the colonists were talking about vile slavery, I was just like, okay, like you're not really like working on no plantation. You're not like, you know, your women aren't getting raped or anything, and like you're not getting beaten or whipped. So kind of like, what are you really feeling down about in this sense? I really kind of want to get your perspective on it, since like they thought what, of course, Britain was doing to them was like somewhat like kind of like slavery, even though it just wasn't. So I kind of just wanted to get like your take on it.
I mean, they called it, bro. They called the British rule vile agnostic slavery, which is absolutely crazy. Like when I read that, I honestly chuckled a little bit because I thought it was funny that they called that slavery, and they went around like right after that and like whipped us. So honestly, I want to call bullshit on it, and I mean that literally, because that is probably the dumbest thing I've read so far in this textbook, and I mean that sincerely.
Same.
Yeah.
It goes on to talk about how like slaves, they use this new political language to address their own conditions, which I absolutely love. I also think that the colonists thought that we were not that smart to understand political languages at that time, but We do.
Hey.
We do. We do. So I'm like really proud that like they went on and they're like, oh hell yeah, like this is what we're gonna do since they're doing it. But moving on, 1765 mainly, like we're kind of just gonna like sum it up really, if everyone knows what's going on leading up to the breakout of the war, all the acts that were being passed, the Stamp Act, and like the boycott of British goods. During this time, it also mentions in the books when they were boycotting British goods, American slaves took this advantage of running away. So, whoopee. And it also mentions Phyllis Whitley, which we talked about in chapter 1, who wrote a lot during this time. I love this, that she questioned how the colonists could reconcile their cry of liberty with the exercise of oppressive power over others. And I absolutely love this, that she questioned that. And I kind of want to get your sense on it, Jackson, because when I read it, I'm just like, that's what we've been thinking this whole entire time when we like hit the Americas, on just like how can they want freedom, but at the same time, they don't see the freedom for others, but they want it so bad themselves, but they won't be willing to give it to others because they deem them beneath them or scums of the earth.
Less than. And I think you're right about that. I think Phyllis literally pinned the tail on the donkey. She got that poignantly correct. Like, when I go back and think about the times that she's living in, she's hearing all these white people say, we're enslaved, this is terrible. I cannot believe the oppression we are facing, when she knows what her brothers and sisters are going on in their lives every single days and the horrors they face. So I am so glad that she had the courage to speak out. And I'm so glad it's in this book, because I feel like things like this is stuff I wish classes would teach about.
Most definitely, same. So it goes on to talk about freedom suits, which are legal actions by which slaves sought to achieve freedom in Britain and American courts. An example they gave was Jenny Slew. She went up. Her mother, that she claimed was white and that she was free. And if you remember what we talked about, the children's status went through the mother, because mainly the woman was the slave, then like the man who could like because if there was like an interracial mixing and the father was like white, so all the status went through the mother who was a slave. So she fought for that. So yes, an important case was the Somerset Case, which freed an American slave named James Somerset in 1772, inspired new challenges to slavery throughout the British Empire. In January 1773, Massachusetts Blacks collectively petitioned the colony's governor and legislator for the first time. The document appealed to legislators to relieve the unhappy state and condition of the enslaved Africans. And it also goes on to mention James Otis Jr., who we mentioned a couple minutes ago, never even freed his own slaves, even though he was like free men, white or black. What do you kind of like think about this, Jackson, kind of like of all the cases that were like being set by like, African Americans like for their freedom, and then like actually like going out and like saying like, hey, this is wrong, and even going to like governments and like people in high places and saying like, you know, this is wrong, like we want our freedom, like this case has proven it here, blank period. So what do you think about that?
I think it's something that we should do nowadays, not gonna lie. Reading this, I was reflecting on where we are right now, how even in the NBA, how the players are right now trying to get the owners to get, help them legally throughout these process and defunding the police and things like that. So when I read this, I related to nowadays and the things that we kind of need to be on right now,
How do you also feel, because I bet you and I that we've like noticed is that there's been a consistency of the contradiction of mainly of white men in the book, because it's mainly talked about white men, of like power or anything, that they say freedom is for all, but then their words most definitely contradict their actions, just like how James Otis, he was all about, where is it, that colonists are by the law of nature freeborn, as indeed all men are, white or black, for which he said, but he never even freed his own slave manservant at all, even though he said those words. So I kind of want to get your take on it, because we've seen this consistency of how they've contradicted their words a lot.
I think that they twist the words in their favor is the way they do it. You know, there's a ton of contradiction in this book. Their whole philosophy was very contradictory. Every man should be free, but the black man and the black woman, you know, that's contradicting. You know, you talk about, like, even before in the last chapter, the last podcast we had, when we were talking about religion and slavery, how the priest deemed it was okay to own slaves, when we know that Jesus would never let that happen. Come on. You know, I think that they kind of twisted it to suit them best. So they're always in favor. So they're always in power and stay in power because they don't want to lose it.
Agreed. So the book goes on to talk about Black patriots. It said that 5,000 African Americans estimated to have fought alongside American forces during the Revolution. Crispus Attucks, a Black seaman who was likely a fugitive slave, was the first American Revolution casualty. It goes on to talk about a little bit of his background, how he escaped his former slave master, and he kept a low profile to, of course, avoid being captured. And he worked on the Boston waterfront when he was not at sea. It talks about how Atticus was among many Bostonians who resented the rise of British military presence. And it talks about British redcoats and the smuggling of goods at that time. And I kind of just wanted to stop right there, right before I keep on going on, and just ask you, Jackson, because the book brings it up, how do you feel in knowing that 5,000 African Americans estimated fought alongside the Americans, and even though they were during that time, as we just know from just other history books, that they were given their freedom, or some I don't know the whole entire extent, but they were given their freedom, but at the same time not all of them were. So I kind of wanted to get your perspective on just how you feel that we were fighting a war that really wasn't for us. It was for others, for their freedom and not ours.
Especially when I think about the Southern slaves, after the war, a couple of the Northern states kind of passed laws to make slavery illegal, but those Southern states did not at all. Those Southern slaves did fight too. I feel so bad for them, trying to go to war to fight for your family's freedom, to try to give your family a better life. I think anyone can relate to trying to get a better life. And to end up not getting it, no matter how much you fought, no matter what you saw in the horrors of war, still denied. I can't even imagine. I couldn't even imagine what's that like, and still have the courage to keep going. It really does speak to the power of our people and the strength of us to keep going and keep fighting no matter what happens when we go through. And I really hope that everyone always remembers the things we've been through and how strong we truly are.
Agreed, most definitely. I just think the 5,000 that they were most definitely even though at the end for those African Americans, it was freedom, because that's what they really wanted. And who wouldn't want that at that time when you see other people free to do what they want to do? I also think it just goes to show that no matter what side they were fighting on, that that it was freedom, but it was also that, I don't know, would you like call it somewhat? Because the book mentions with Atticus that like he did support, like he did like understand how the colonists felt with the British and how he was with them. So I don't want to assume everyone on like those 5,000 men that like joined the Americans, but like I guess I assume just a little bit that they kind of felt what he felt a little bit, maybe just like a little bit of like American pride, like, ayo, like we're over here and like this is like America, you know? So like a little bit of that pride, even though they're like, we want our freedom. So
Mm-hmm.
I do give them my respects in that, most definitely. Um, the book goes on to talk about March 5th, 1770
Most
in
that.
the afternoon. It kind of began before the afternoon, like in a tavern on the Boston's waterfront, kind of later in the day, um, outraged by this intrusion on their turf, talking about the colonists and how British soldiers were on their church. 30 men began to taunt and heckle British soldiers stationed outside. Atticus was the first to die, and I love how the book describes him a little bit. He was 47 years old at the time of his death. But I love how they just paint this beautiful picture of him, that he was more than 6 feet tall and powerfully built. Atticus was one of the mob leaders. I think because we've never read this in like in an American history book at all. It mentions him, but it doesn't go on to further explain just like this majesty about him. Like, of course, the African American book does on Freedom on My Mind. And I just absolutely love it how it just creates this beautiful picture of him and how he was a leader. He just wasn't like standing by following the crowd. It actually showed like he was like leading this. And it goes on to talk about how Atticus was widely celebrated as the first to defy, the first to die. It also goes on to say, sadly, but his race was very rarely noted in the Revolutionary era. I kind of want to get your take on this, Jackson, before like I say anything. So
I love how they put it as first to defy, first to die, because he was the first to defy. The black man was the first to defy for a country that does not love him. He is still fighting for this country, still trying to put the, I won't say best interest, but trying to fight for a better future is what I'm trying to say. Even though his future may look grim as a black man, that he still is trying to provide a better future for America. And they did paint a beautiful picture of him talking about his background, about how he was paid lower than the other workers, and yet he still worked hard. No matter what he went through, he always fought through it. I really do agree with you in your sentiments with the book. It has been such a great opportunity to learn about our race and where we come from, the history, and things of that nature.
I absolutely agree. He didn't at all have to agree or side with the colonists against British rule at the time and what they were implementing on the colonists. He really didn't have to. He could have just been worrying about like, I'm free, I get to do what I gotta do, of course, keep a low profile. It speaks volumes on his character that like he was a leader, especially in that day of age when a lot of people at that time, they were trying to just gain freedom. And I don't even know, do I really want to say like freedom in a sense, because they already had freedom themselves. I think it's more of like they were trying to release more of like, and that umbilical cord that they had with Britain at the time. I really don't want to say freedom at all, because the oppression that they gave us for the next 400 years um, that and still going on kind of now, that is really fighting for freedom. And I just believe that he really defined that for us.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a lot of people before him, he really defined that. And it goes on to say in the book that Paul Revere, a popular engraving that he did, which we've all seen in like history textbooks, about like the Boston Massacre, that he didn't even put him in that painting, in that engraving at all. But he was like the first to die. And he was buried among everyone else who died in that massacre, and tens of thousands came to like mourn. But I think it's just the blatant respect that he wasn't even like put in that engraving at all. They just replaced him with like another white man just to like bring more of the cause. But like it goes to show that like his life really in the start of this like revolution didn't mean squat. He was nothing, even though he was so much more. And I'm not gonna lie, like really angers me because he was fighting for like a country, like you said, Jackson, that did not love him, that did not look after him, and he was willing to fight for it still. And I just find that I'm just blown away by it, really. I'm blown away by just what they all do and what we present day, how we still fight for this country, even though as of right now, it doesn't really feel as if like they love us back and we're still feeling that sentiment. So I wanted to get like your opinion on it.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you completely. I want to first say that he is truly a forgotten hero in this war that needs to be honored. And I think we can start by doing that today, by talking about him, speaking about him positively, remembering who he was and what he did for this country. And I think it goes on by people who listen, talking about him, spreading the word. So he's not forgotten. He should not be forgotten because he did die for the cause. He is the first to defy and the first to die. He is the first, and he should not be forgotten. Even though Paul Revere left him out, doesn't mean we should.
Most
We
definitely.
can change.
It mentions in the book, it really doesn't mention this Black abolitionist name, but he would later put it that white Americans were not ready to acknowledge that, but for the blow struck at the right time by a Black man, the United States, with all that of which is right and justice, both might not have been an independent republic at all. And that kind of synced in. I'm like, like if he would have never died, would there have really ever been like, there probably would have been some type of outburst, but like, would there have been like a revolution like at all if it wasn't for like this man, Cyprus Atticus, if he would have never died, really? um would there really like be anything? And I kind of want to get your aspect on that quote, because that kind of
I
had me
think,
like thinking for a moment, like
later in the book, they talk about the 5,000 soldiers that went on to fight in the war, right? And they're talking about whether America would win the war without them or not. And that question lingers in my head still after reading it. I always wonder, like, would America win the war? How much does America actually need to thank Black people for what we've done for this country? Our fair share of the cut of what we've done here, what's often not talked about. Because honestly, I didn't honestly know that Black people fought in the Revolutionary War. No one talks about it. I didn't learn in the history books. I had to learn that later on by independent research, reading this book. So I think it's something that we should, of course, talk about. But Oh my gosh, I think I lost my point.
It's deep, and just like leave it off at like this, and like you can comment if you want to. I think it's something, I don't really know if any other race would do this. Would they fight in someone else's like battles that really didn't benefit them at all? It just benefited that like one race's um agenda, really. And you see time and time again through American history how we've always fought in their battles. And it's astonishing because it's like we love America, but at the same time, like it doesn't love us, but we keep on fighting for her, even though she's not really like willing to like make the changes that are necessary to accommodate everyone. And I just think like reading this, most definitely, because I had no idea about Atticus, and that like he was the first one to die and like the first one to defy at all. Like the only thing I've heard about this man is that like he was shot, and like that's it. And then like they move on, and they're like Paul Revere like did this beautiful engraving, and you know it just brought the colonists closer together, and like you know helping them like get their stuff together and like start the American like revolution for like freedom and stuff. They don't really like talk about like this man, like if this man never died, and if you never had like those 5,000 soldiers, like you could have lost the war. Even if we don't even like include like the French that like came to help kind of at the end, like they could have lost the war like that, because we have to kind of remember just a little history that like Britain at that time, they had a very incredible like navy power was just like that's them right there. But it just goes on to show that we've been fighting these like wars for them, and it like kind of sucks because it kind of brings that into today where we're fighting our own wars, and even though we have our allies, they're not all behind us like we were all behind them during their wars and stuff, and like we had their back. And it's kind of more of like you don't have our backs at all. So ooh, did you want to add anything?
I'll add some stuff in. You know, I think I want to continue your point with them not supporting us with the women's movement. Women's were excuse me. Women were okay. I'm here now. Okay, so women first in the 1920s, if I believe correctly, they were going for the right to vote. But when white women got the right to vote, black women still didn't because they were still black. And those same white women who were hand in hand, you know, with black people trying to get the right, when it turned back to, hey, so you're going to help us now get our freedom, right? Nope. Disappeared, went ghost, you know. And that often happens throughout history, you know, even nowadays, you know. Everyone wants to talk about equality, but when you talk about equality for the black man, everyone disappears.
It's crazy.
It really is.
Crazy. All right. It goes on to talk about Black Northerners were among the patriots who rallied against the British, often joining the struggles in hope of encouraging the colonists to reject African slavery as well British tyranny. Sadly, African slavery, they did not include us at all in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was, but they were like, not today. So that did not go well for us. Most definitely made them rage against the British. So it goes on to talk about Manuel Haynes, how he joined the Granville Minutemen and fought in several battles before falling ill. I absolutely love this because it talks about how he was recently freed from indentured servitude and he wished also to expand the boundaries of freedom. Of course, it goes on to talk about Declaration of Independence, 1776, but also goes to talk about what he wrote, Liberty Further Extended, which is an unpublished manuscript by Haynes, called for the called for the ending or abolition of slavery in the American colonies. I absolutely love this. Of course, had no idea that like this was even written. Like it was a whole like, oh my gosh, like evolution of like slavery and it's like liberty further extended. Like, yes. Look at that unpublished manuscript, just speaking words out here today. I was most definitely hyped up. I'm like, yes. I'm like, we're writing things down, trying to get up in here and stuff. Of course, I was like sad when like I reread it and it was like unpublished. I'm like, damn, that thing was not published. Sons of a guns. So kind of wanted to see what you thought about it when you like saw like, all right, like this man Haynes wrote like Liberty Further Extended. Like, go on with your bad self.
Yeah, you funny, bro. So I had kind of the same reaction. I was really happy when I saw this personally. You know, it made me proud. It made me sad to realize that wasn't published. I was like, Black man really can't have anything in this world. God dang. But I'm glad that someone, I don't know how they found that, but I'm glad they did, and I'm glad I read it. Okay, I'm glad that it's out here in the world. I encourage everyone to read it. Read it,
Exactly.
please. Okay. Got the shoulders with it?
Yes, got the shoulders with it. So it goes on to talk about Peter Salem, a local slave, was freed to help defend the town. He was widely credited with firing the shot that killed the unpopular British leader, Major John Pitcairn. So it was not a white man that killed that son of a gun. It was a Black one. Cheese. It goes on to talk about how Haynes hoped that military service would win Black Americans their undeniable rights to liberty, and many of his like slave brothers, they most definitely clearly shared his hopes in that. Of course, as we know from just like reading about American history, that did not happen. For all African Americans, like of course in American history it does say that like men in the military, they did gain their freedom but not undeniable right to liberty like the white man of that time. It was just more of like freedom. Would you call it, Jackson, like tell me if like you don't agree, but like would you call it more of like, even though they like fought in this war and like they gained their freedom, it was more of like freedom in a cage? In a sense, it wasn't really like, here you go.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's like with a leash is what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah, like you're free, but like you're in like a cage. Like you can't really
like when you put your dog in the dog park, like they're free to run around, right? But they can't get past that fence over there.
Yeah.
Definitely. Freedom to a certain extent.
They didn't have like
all
rights and stuff. Rights. It goes on to talk about this slave, Branch, whose autobiography later recorded his valiance about fighting to liberate freemen, my tyrants. Like when I read that, like to liberate freemen, my tyrants, I just like he just embodied the whole entire thing. That like literally like to liberate freemen, my tyrants. If that does not speak volumes to you, I don't know what will.
I think you're completely right in that. When I read that, it made me so happy. I wish I would have learned. Why don't we? We need to redo our history book so badly. We should talk about this hero. And this is not like, me and Sierra are not trying to underplay what the white counterparts did in the war. We just would like to be equally talked about as well. You know, just to get that clear, that we just want to be equally talked about, like this man right here, who spent his time fighting for his people during the war, which is absolutely amazing and should be talked about and taught. I wish I learned about this in school. I wish I did.
I did too. Like, this is literally, it's like literally seeing yourself through this. It's
Yeah.
like seeing yourself most definitely, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing more of your identity throughout it all. And that's why like we're doing this, of course, is to really tell other people, and of course our own community, like, hey, like there's so much that we put into this. Like, it's just not this one side of like American history that they've been teaching us since we were little. Like, this is our history too. Like, this is all us right here, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm so happy about it, most definitely. Um, it says that he was drafted in the 6th Connecticut Regiment while still enslaved. The book does talk about, and Jackson, I believe, like you mentioned this, that the slave holding colonies, or like states a little bit as they put it in the book, like they weren't really excited. They weren't really into like giving their slaves to like fight in the war at all, because of course the book mentioned like they saw them as like human property. Like, this is like cash, like a whole entire cash cow for us. So they weren't really into that. The book also mentioned that even some slave masters, like they literally like gave their slaves, they were given the option, like, you could give your slaves away to fight in like the war, that way you don't have to fight in it. And I'm just like, what? And that kind of ticked me off a little bit. I'm just like, you want to be released from Great Britain, but you don't want to go and like fight. You're just gonna let your slaves fight for you. That way you can sit your hiney on down at home and be drinking whatever and be eating whatever while like they're getting their butts kicked and like killed in battle. No, like no. It makes you kind of think like the people who did this is like, did you really want to be like released anyway? Like, what do you think about this, Jackson? What do you think about this, buddy?
I think much the same as you think. So, talking about this specifically, talking about seeing your slaves instead of you, so you can stay at home and chill at the crib while other people go and die for you. That is, as it sounds, messed up. And it's more of that, even some of the slave masters, I don't know which one's more messed up. Sending your slaves to go fight for you, or I want these slaves so bad because they're just worth so much money to me. They don't look at them as people, remember. They look at them as like cattle. Like, I don't want to donate my cattle because I'd rather make this money. So I'm going to go fight this little war, come back, and at least I get to keep all my property. You know, I don't know which one's worse, to be honest. They're both terrible, and they both happened.
Messed up. All right, the book goes and talk about Black Loyalists. So Loyalist colonists who remained loyal to Britain during the American Revolution. So it talks about that Britain was able to attain 15,000 African Americans to join their side during the war, compared to America's 5,000, because Americans were like, no, 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 like, you don't need to enlist, like, we don't need that. But of course they changed their mind, but like Britain was running out the gates with like, all right, like, let's get these people. It goes on to talk about on November 7th, John Murray, Earl of Dunmore, the Virginia royal governor, reached out to local allies by issuing what became known as Lord Dunmar's Proclamation. This published broadside offered freedom to all indentured servants, Negroes, or others. So, most definitely, it does get a little bit of information about Dunmar, how he was like ran out of town, and how he was situated on this British ship, but like how he wanted to go back and reclaim the town that he was run out of, and how they started recruiting African Americans, saying like, hey, you'll like get your freedom. And of course that appealed to a lot of African Americans. It appealed to 800 families that came to Dunmar too, of African Americans who came to him. I found it really interesting that he had a regent called Lord Dunmar's Ethiopian what is it? Regiment. I found that really interesting. I'm just like, oh, we're gonna add the word Ethiopian up in there today. Like, like, okay. Like, I had no idea why we're that. Ethiopian regiment. I guess he found that really exotic to say when he went to bed at night.
You caught me with that one. You got me with that one. Just imagine each of them think, it's such a great idea.
Great idea. Woke up and be like, we should call it this. But I find it absolutely, I just think the number 15,000 just like kind of like threw me off a little bit, because I'm just like, wait a minute, like there was only like 5,000 estimated that was on the American side, but like 15,000, like 15-000 on like British side. Like I was like, no, okay. Like, what about you, Jackson? Like I was kind of like flabbergasted. I'm like, that's a big number.
So it kind of makes sense because, like, in the book, they talk about like how America started later. They were reluctant at first. They didn't want to divide the states, as you said earlier. They're kind of like, well, we don't want to make the South mad. We all have to be united against Britain. So no slaves in the war yet. Then Britain was like, okay, we'll do it then. Then all the slaves start migrating down. And then probably like halfway into the war, they're like, okay, let's start doing this because we need more people, and we're losing people fast. So then they start letting slaves into the war. But that is a big number at the same time. It really is. And, Britain was like, hey, guaranteed freedom. America was like wishy-washy about it, depending on where you were. Southern states, you probably knew that, this is probably like what do I want to say, a coin in the in the
I don't
in
even
the
know what type of saying that is myself, so I can't help you there. The coin in
when this
the
happens. Coin in
the coin in the fountain.
Forget it.
No?
Coin in the fountain. Like, this is a whisper of a hope, that this is probably not going to happen. In the northern states, it's probably more likely it's going to happen. Most of the slaves came from northern states. But, it really shows that what Black people were willing to risk for freedom and the freedom of their families. 800 families migrated down for the chance of freedom. How hard is it to sneak out your whole family out of the plantation? I can't even imagine that. And to make it all the way there. Jesus. I can't even imagine. It shows how hard wow. It's a shocker for sure.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, like, I'm not trying to like make this funny or like anything, but like I was really wondering, I'm like, okay, so like Blacks are fighting both sides, and like when they go
they ain't killing bro.
okay, because like I was literally wondering that, like, they're going face to face, like if one of them sees one another, is it more of like,
I don't
hey
know.
yo, you free, I'm free after this, and like they just bypass each other, just like we ain't gonna kill each other, and just like
I can see it going both ways, Black man seeing a Black man being like, hey, it is. But also, both fighting for their freedoms, both fighting for their rights on either side, I think it really could have went both ways,
That's
depending on
definitely.
the situation.
Did you want to say anything else that like, or do you want to like post a question or anything that you read in?
You did a really great time covering questions today, so I don't think I actually have one today.
Oh, okay. You don't have one
No
today?
deep things today. No,
Hey,
ma'am.
that
I
good.
just would love. I got one little one. I want
Okay.
to ask you, what do you think that once Americans started letting Black people into the war, how do you think they were treated in the war when they were all together in the units? I can't imagine what kind of things that happened during those times, what kind of things they would say to their Black counterparts during those times.
I would think, because I remember just a little bit from like American history that like on both sides that like Black men were like spies for like both the Americans and the British. But when it comes to being treated, I want to say, because it's wartime, that like status really doesn't matter. Like the only
You would
like
hope, right?
the only like thing that should like matter right now is like kicking the other person's like butt and like winning the war, really. um but at the same time, during that time, I find it kind of hard to believe that a little bit. I find it a little hard just to believe that like, of course they were solely focused on the war, but like they also knew that like, all right, these Black people, they're fighting with us, and like they're not of the same like status as I am at all as a white person. So I find it that they were probably treated like bad. I wouldn't say like as bad if they were like back on like a plantation or anything like that. But I would consider it like a little rough, of course, even though I would love to think that like, since everyone's like fighting in a war and they're like, we want to live and like enjoy this freedom or this release for like from like this oppressive like state, the UK, for the colonists, release and like freedom for African Americans, that like it was mainly focused on like, let's just win this war, that way we can get back to our loved ones. But at the same time, I don't really think that's like, I don't really think that was like the case at all, in all honesty, because it was just rough in the sense just to get like African Americans on the American side, because like a lot of slave owners, because it states in the book even that like the 13 colonies, like they were trying to be a slave holding republic. Like there was no like thought of like, we're all gonna be free, like everybody, like purple, green, white, Black, Asian, whatever, like that wasn't like, it most definitely states in the book that like they were intending to be a slaveholding republic after like Britain was out of the picture. So I find that very hard to believe.
Thank you for that, because I agree with the same. I was trying to like, it just popped into my head as we were talking last, and you would hope that since they're all on the same side, woo, freedom, we're all fighting for each of our own freedom, that it would be equal and that they would treat them right. But going of course through these past chapters, we know otherwise. And I kind of bring this question to more of just put in the mind of people the strength of Black people, that they fought in this war, that it wasn't really even their war in the first place. None of the things they were fighting for did not affect them at all. Just to try to get a chance of freedom for their family. And they put up with stuff. They put up with not only the war, but the people, their allies themselves, deal with their crap too. And I just want to put that out there. That's why I want to pose the question.
We are a strong race. Most definitely.
Really are.
We are a strong race.
Mm-hmm.
We've been a strong race. But that concludes chapter 2. Not chapter 2, my bad. I'm thinking all the way back there. Chapter 3, part 2, African Americans in the American Revolution. We have exciting things coming up for you guys. So we're excited. We hope you guys get excited for it. A lot of good conversation coming up in the future. But just wanted to thank you guys for tuning in. So happy that like we're back. That 3 weeks away was a little torturous on the low, not gonna lie.
It was stressful indeed.
It was. But again, I want to thank just Jackson for being on the call with me today. Carrington and Christian, they were missed today, but they have some things. But hopefully we'll all be on there on our next convo. But other than that, that's the end for today. So thank you guys for tuning in.